Welcome to Money Moves Daily. I'm here to cut through the noise on a number you need to know. $1,300. That's what tariffs could cost your household this year. In 2025, businesses quietly absorbed most tariff costs. They took the hit so you wouldn't notice. But that buffer is running out and the bill is coming due. Today we're breaking down exactly how tariffs translate to your grocery bill, your appliance purchases, and your overall budget. No politics. Just math you can use. Here's something most people don't realize. Tariffs aren't paid by foreign countries. They're paid by American importers. And eventually, those costs roll downhill to you. Think of it like a hidden tax that takes 12 to 18 months to show up in your shopping cart. We're about to enter that window. The numbers tell a story of delayed impact. Businesses built stockpiles, protected their margins, and waited. Now the stockpiles are empty. By the end of this episode, you'll understand exactly which purchases to prioritize, how to budget for price increases, and strategies to protect your purchasing power. Let's start with the basics. A tariff is essentially a tax on imported goods. When a product crosses the border, someone has to pay that extra charge. Contrary to popular belief, it's not the foreign manufacturer writing that check. It's the American company importing the goods who pays the tariff at the border. From there, the importer faces a choice. Absorb the extra cost and accept lower profits, or raise prices and pass the cost to customers. Or some combination of both. In 2024 and early 2025, smart businesses saw tariffs coming. They loaded up on inventory before the higher rates kicked in, creating a buffer between policy and your wallet. That pre-tariff inventory acted like a shield. Companies could sell products at the old prices because they'd purchased them at the old costs. But inventory doesn't last forever. Products sell through. Warehouses empty. And eventually, every importer must restock at the new, higher tariff rates. This is why tariff impacts lag the policy announcement by a year or more. The delay isn't failure. It's just businesses working through their old stock first. There's another factor: competition. In 2025, businesses competed fiercely to keep customers. Raising prices meant losing market share to rivals who hadn't raised theirs yet. But when everyone's inventory runs out at roughly the same time, that competitive pressure vanishes. No one gains advantage by holding prices low anymore. This creates a tipping point. We're entering that window now. Early 2026 marks the moment when theoretical tariff costs become real price tags. According to Yale Budget Lab research, tariffs will amount to an average tax increase of $1,300 per U.S. household in 2026. That's a significant hit. To put that in perspective, $1,300 is roughly $25 per week. That's a tank of gas or several bags of groceries, quietly disappearing from your budget. JPMorgan Research found that businesses absorbed roughly 80% of tariff costs in 2025. Consumers only felt about 20% of the actual impact. But here's the critical shift. That ratio could flip entirely by late 2026. Businesses may pass 80% of costs to consumers, absorbing only 20% themselves. CNN Business reports that businesses built massive inventory stockpiles early in 2025. But as those stockpiles run out, companies must purchase at higher tariff rates. The article notes companies can only absorb extra costs for so long before financial reality forces price increases. Profit margins have limits. JPMorgan Research indicates the pass-through of tariffs to consumer prices has been modest so far. U.S. importers absorbed the bulk of tariff changes through 2025. However, their analysis projects that dynamic will change significantly in the first half of 2026 as inventory buffers deplete across industries. Let's talk specific categories. JPMorgan projects durables prices. Think appliances, furniture, electronics will rise a cumulative 4.5% over 2025 through 2027. Non-durable goods face even steeper increases. The same research shows non-durables could rise 5.6% cumulatively. That's your everyday consumables. The USDA Economic Research Service predicts overall food prices will rise 3% in 2026. That's slightly higher than the typical annual increase we've grown used to. But restaurant and takeout prices face a steeper climb. Food away from home prices are projected to rise 4.6% in 2026, over 50% faster than grocery inflation. Why the restaurant premium? Restaurants face tariffs on imported ingredients plus higher labor costs, utility expenses, and equipment. Every input compounds the final check. Morningstar forecasts overall inflation will rise to 2.7% in 2026, up from 2.6% in 2025. That sounds small, but it represents a trend reversal. After years of fighting to bring inflation down, policymakers now face upward pressure again. The Fed worked hard to reach their targets. Tariffs complicate that progress. The Congressional Budget Office estimates tariff policies will increase average annual inflation by roughly 0.4 percentage points over 2025 and 2026 combined. That might sound modest, but 0.4% on a $20 trillion economy translates to $80 billion in additional costs circulating through the system. Not everyone agrees the impact will be contained. The Peterson Institute warns inflation could potentially exceed 4% by the end of 2026 in a more severe scenario. Their analysis considers factors beyond tariffs alone: potential retaliation from trading partners, supply chain disruptions, and second-order effects that amplify initial price increases. The gap between JPMorgan's 2.7% forecast and Peterson's 4% warning represents genuine uncertainty. Economists are working with incomplete information. So which products will see the biggest price jumps? Import concentration matters enormously here. Products where imports dominate face the steepest increases. Electronics top the vulnerability list. Roughly 80% of consumer electronics sold in America are imported, primarily from tariff-affected countries in Asia. Appliances follow close behind. Washing machines, refrigerators, and air conditioners rely heavily on imported components even when assembled domestically. Furniture, especially case goods like dressers and tables, faces significant exposure. Vietnam and China supply the bulk of American furniture imports. Clothing presents a mixed picture. While most apparel is imported, supply chains have diversified across many countries. Brands have options to shift sourcing. Food categories vary widely. Fresh produce from Mexico faces different tariff treatment than processed goods from Asia. Geography matters as much as the product itself. Auto parts present a complex web. Many vehicles are assembled in the U.S., but contain components from multiple countries, each potentially subject to different tariff rates. The common thread: complexity in global supply chains means tariff impacts ripple unpredictably. A 20% tariff on one component might raise the final product price by 3%. Conversely, products with concentrated import sources see more direct pass-through. If 90% of supply comes from one tariffed country, alternatives are scarce. So what can you actually do about this? Let's talk strategies. Remember, this is educational information, not financial advice. Your situation may differ. First, consider your major purchase timing. If you're in the market for appliances, electronics, or furniture, earlier purchases may tend to offer better pricing than waiting. This isn't about panic buying. It's about thoughtful acceleration. If you need a new refrigerator this year anyway, buying in Q1 may historically offer advantages over Q4. Second, build a modest emergency fund buffer specifically for price absorption. An extra $100 to $150 monthly could help offset the projected $1,300 annual increase. Think of this as inflation insurance. You're not predicting disaster. You're creating flexibility. If prices don't rise as projected, that money becomes savings or investment. Third, review your grocery budget with fresh eyes. Domestic alternatives often exist for imported goods. Local sourcing may become increasingly cost-competitive. This doesn't mean avoiding all imports. It means understanding where your food comes from and having alternatives ready if prices on specific items spike unexpectedly. Fourth, consider locking in fixed-rate loans now if you're planning major borrowing. If inflation rises, the Federal Reserve may respond with rate adjustments. Past patterns suggest that central banks typically raise rates to combat inflation. While past performance doesn't guarantee future results, fixed rates can provide payment predictability. Fifth, for investors, research suggests considering companies with domestic supply chains. Businesses less exposed to tariffs may potentially benefit from competitors' cost pressures. Reshoring, bringing manufacturing back to America, has historically accelerated during tariff periods. Some domestic manufacturers may see increased demand as imports become pricier. Finally, stay informed but avoid information overload. Monthly inflation reports and quarterly earnings from major retailers tell the real story better than daily headlines. Let's address the elephant in the room. There's significant disagreement about whether tariffs ultimately help or hurt American households. This isn't a political podcast. Some argue tariff revenue could offset costs through other tax benefits. Others point to domestic manufacturing jobs created. The full economic picture is genuinely complex. What we know with reasonable confidence: in the short term, tariffs tend to raise consumer prices. Whether that trade-off is worthwhile depends on factors beyond pure economics. The Yale Budget Lab's $1,300 figure represents direct consumer cost. It doesn't account for potential benefits from increased domestic production or tariff revenue allocation. Similarly, the Peterson Institute's higher inflation scenario represents a concerning possibility, not a guaranteed outcome. Economic forecasting involves substantial uncertainty. The responsible approach is to prepare for price increases while hoping they prove milder than projected. Planning for the higher estimate protects against surprise. What the data consistently shows across studies: consumer prices lag tariff implementation. The 2025 buffer is real, and its depletion in 2026 is the mechanism driving projected increases. Understanding this mechanism matters more than predicting exact numbers. It helps you evaluate competing claims and time your own financial decisions appropriately. The 80-20 ratio JPMorgan identified: businesses absorbing 80% in 2025, potentially only 20% by late 2026, provides the clearest framework for what's changing. When businesses stop absorbing costs, consumers start paying them. It's not vindictive, it's arithmetic. Companies can't subsidize prices indefinitely without going bankrupt. This is why the first half of 2026 represents the critical transition window. It's when theory becomes reality on store shelves across America. Your personal inflation rate may differ significantly from national averages. If you buy mostly domestic goods, eat at home, and drive an electric vehicle, tariff exposure tends to be lower. Conversely, if you're furnishing a new home with imported furniture, replacing multiple appliances, and eating out frequently, your tariff exposure is likely on the higher end. Take an inventory of your planned major purchases for 2026. Research where those products originate. This gives you a personalized sense of your actual tariff exposure. For each planned purchase, research alternatives. Are there domestic brands? Refurbished options? Different categories that meet the same need with lower import exposure? The goal isn't to avoid all tariff costs. That's likely impossible in a globalized economy. The goal is to make informed decisions rather than absorbing price increases passively. Information asymmetry often works against consumers. Retailers know exactly when their costs increase. Shoppers often only notice when something feels expensive. By understanding the tariff timeline, you flip that asymmetry. You know what's coming before it arrives on price tags. Knowledge creates options. Remember the key numbers: $1,300 per household, according to Yale Budget Lab. 3% food inflation, according to USDA. 4.5% on durables, per JPMorgan. The range of overall inflation forecasts spans from 2.7% at the conservative end to potentially over 4% in more aggressive scenarios. Plan for the middle of that range while building flexibility for the higher end. That's prudent household financial management regardless of the specific driver. Set a calendar reminder to revisit your budget in June 2026. By then, first half data will reveal whether prices are tracking the higher or lower projections. If inflation proves milder than feared, redirect your buffer savings to investments or debt reduction. If it's worse, you'll be glad you prepared. Finally, resist the temptation to make dramatic changes based on projections. Tariffs represent one factor among many affecting your finances. Maintain perspective. The $1,300 figure sounds alarming in isolation, but spread across 12 months and an entire household's consumption, it's manageable with modest adjustments. Smart money moves aren't about perfect timing or avoiding all costs. They're about understanding what's happening and making conscious choices rather than passive ones. Let's recap what we covered today. Tariffs function as a tax on imports paid by American businesses and eventually passed to consumers after a lag period. The buffer from 2025 inventory stockpiles is depleting. The first half of 2026 marks the transition when businesses shift from absorbing costs to passing them through. Key projections: $1,300 per household impact, 2.7 to 4% inflation range, and significant variation across product categories. Your action items: consider major purchase timing, build a modest buffer, research domestic alternatives, lock in fixed rates if borrowing, and stay informed without obsessing. This has been Money Moves Daily. Remember, this content is for educational purposes and is not financial advice. Consult qualified advisors for your specific situation. If this episode helped you understand tariff impacts, share it with someone planning major purchases this year. Subscribe for daily insights to make smarter money moves.